Are we live?
Yeah, I heard something.
All right, welcome to another meeting of the House Committee Number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions. We have 4 bills that hopefully we'll get through today, as we do have, after this week, we have 1 week remaining, committee, to get bills through the committee. So next Friday will be the last day for a bill to be reported out of committee, and I do have a desk drawer full of bills. So, and some of those are your bills, committee. So just keep that in mind and help me move the meeting along so I can get to those bills. That's definitely my intent. With that, call the roll, please.
Representative Chadwick. Representative Haroldson. Representative Harshman. Oh, he's next door, yes.
Excused.
Vice Chairman Knapp.
Here.
Representative Newsom, excused. Representative Ottman. Here. Representative Wiley.
Here.
Representative Yin, excused.
Yes, excused.
Thank you.
All right. So the first bill for our consideration is House Bill 173, records available to post. We have the sponsor, Representative Minority Whip Provenza. Take us through your bill.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you today House Bill 173, records available to post. What we have seen in talking with the Peace Officer Standards and Training Office is that there seems to have been an oversight in writing our public records law in terms of what is available for personnel files and the certifying bodies. Specifically, in this case, we're talking about post. So the Peace Officer Standards and Training Office is under the Attorney General. They are the certifying body for law enforcement. They also provide training. I hope to have Director Walsh join us virtually, although I know they have a graduation today, so they might be late or celebrating, but hopefully he can answer any specific questions you might have. This bill is similar to a bill that was brought in 2021, Mr. Chairman, that you might recognize. However, we have really honed it down to be very specific and only about what Post has access to. So walking you through the bill, well, I guess kind of giving you why this bill has come is Post has had since 2020 at least 5 requests for records that have been denied. So when, say, an agency terminates an officer or there is a public complaint that they find is warranted for investigation, they might, they go through a complaint received process, they gather investigative documents if they can. They submit those documents to the Attorney General, and then they kind of review and decide if they need to request a hearing through the Office of Administrative Hearing. What Post has seen is that if they need access to records, sometimes agencies, they might feel like, I can't give you those records based on the statutes that exist. And so Post could have its hands tied in terms of they're trying to do their job, which is potentially decertifying someone who might be tarnishing the good name of law enforcement, or maybe they are going to find that those complaints were unfounded. Typically, civilian complaints go to agencies. They don't necessarily go to Post. So we're not talking about a ton of public complaints submitted. This is more of agency goes through a process. So of the 5 requests that were denied since 2020, 3 were records that were subpoenaed and were still denied. So the courts have also decided that this is that our law has some issue with handing over those personnel records. Two of the 5 were formal written complaints. And my understanding is that maybe those numbers are going to increase. So just in terms of, since as time goes on, I guess that's how things go. But walking you through the bill real briefly, we're looking at statutes 9-1-704. This is where Post has its qualifications for employment as peace officers. Subsections, paragraph M, notwithstanding any other law to the contrary. Personnel file relevant to any of the factors listed in 9-1-704B. That's what law enforcement's like basic requirements are to be certified, which is the job of Post. And so what this says in layman's terms is if Post is doing an investigation that they want records for in personnel files, it has to be relevant to their hiring. It can't just be everything in the personnel file. We've kind of narrowed this to make sure that it's relevant to their profession and being able to complete their job duties. So the personnel file shall not be disclosed by the commission to any other person except as otherwise required by law. Our Title 16 laws don't allow for personnel records to be shared with others, particularly in these cases. And then when we get to 9-1-708, lines 14, this is the dealing with other, I believe this is correctional officers. And then we also have, that's on page 3, starting on line 5. This is dealing with correctional officers. So this is at a county level. So currently, right now, they can access records under DOC with the rest of the statute because they are considered law enforcement. And then we've also included the dispatchers because dispatchers are also overseen by Post. We did not include coroners who are also have the oversight of Post, in part because they have a board, and those issues hasn't necessarily come with Post because Post will not necessarily decertify a coroner, whereas the rest of these professions would be. And for that, I stand for questions.
Committee questions for Representative Provenza? No? All right. Got off pretty easy. Okay. Do we have anyone from Post? I know we have Chris Walsh online, but it says that he's available for any questions. Committee, do you have any questions for Post? We can bring them in. Representative Ottman?
Mr. Chairman, just a point of clarification, what does POST stand for?
Peace Officer Standards and Training
Okay.
Board. I think it's a board. Commission. Okay, any questions for Post? Seeing none. We have public testimony in the room. Yes, ma'am, please come forward. Welcome.
Whoops, members of the committee, I thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Debbie Hinkle, and I'm from Laramie, Wyoming. And my son, Robbie Ramirez, was killed by a police officer in November of 2018. What followed was a total effort by the Sheriff's Department and DCI and the county attorney to protect this officer, not to seek justice, not to follow their own procedures. Sheriff O'Malley did not have, in fact, instructed his officers not to file police reports. They did not do an internal review. My son was unarmed. He was repeatedly asking why he was pulled over, and the police officer would not answer him. It ended up with him being shot, and then being shot twice more while he was on the ground in the back. Nothing was done to this police officer. We took a petition to Chris Walsh with over 2,000 signatures from the Albany County of people that felt like this officer should be decertified. Chris Walsh, after reviewing it, agreed. He has tried for 3 years to get the records so that he could complete this process. We have a system set up where the sheriffs are elected. Should we happen to have a sheriff that decides protection of his police officers is far more important than the law and following his own policies, he can do that. And the only recourse is to not elect him the next year that he's up for election. That's the only recourse, because he's elected. So the one thing that you have put in place is post. The director of post has some capability to actually decertify an officer, even if the sheriff is not in agreement. But he needs to be able to get the records. And you don't have the laws in place to allow that to happen. If they decide to refuse, which they have repeatedly, then there's nothing that he can do. He feels like he is totally on his own. I speak to him probably once a month for 3 years. And he assured me it'd take at least 6 months. But when there's absolutely no cooperation, I mean, this department even went to the point of editing the film so that the part where Robbie was asking why he was pulled over was taken out. So DCI took 2 copies of the body cam. And yet there's nothing that can be done. What is wrong with the system? How are we supposed to trust law enforcement? Don't tie Chris's hands. You've selected him to represent this part of law enforcement so that there are some checks and balances. That's what our government is supposed to be about. I really urge you to pass this bill. It's important. Chris needs it. And if you're worried about the time he spent, think of how much time has been wasted trying to follow through on this case, because he totally believes this officer should not be allowed to be an officer ever again. Robbie was the 3rd person he'd killed. So please pass this bill. Do you have any questions?
Ms. Hinkle, we, on behalf of the committee, definitely want to extend our gratitude for your loss and your willingness to show up and testify on this matter. It's obviously very close to home. It's obviously very personal to you. So we do thank you for your time. Committee, questions for Ms. Hinkle? And for your testimony. Thank you, Ms. Hinkle.
Thank you.
Any additional public testimony? Yes, sir, come on up.
I'm Colonel Tim Cameron, the administrator of the Wyoming Highway Patrol. I appreciate the opportunity to speak very briefly about this bill. We in no way oppose this bill. I did have some concerns, and I'll be honest with you, majority of those concerns have been assuaged by the presentation of Representative Provenza. Our concern was unintended consequences of the bill. The only thing I will point out is for lack of better terminology, some conflicting language in each one of the paragraphs. Specifically, it states the portion of the personnel file relevant to the factors listed, and it refers back to the factors of the background investigation. And that's in each paragraph for police, dispatcher, and corrections. And then later on, it refers to the personnel file should. My recommendation would be just consistent language. Otherwise, that's all I have. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have of me, but again, we certainly do not oppose this bill.
Questions, committee, for the Colonel? All right. Thank you, Colonel.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Hinkle, I have to apologize. My statement came out a little wrong. I meant to say our gratitude for your testimony and our condolences for your loss. So I deeply apologize. I stumbled over my words. Good. Thank you, Colonel. Any additional public testimony on this bill? We do have some online public testimony. Any hands raised in the virtual world? Okay, with that, I will close public testimony on this bill. Committee, what is your pleasure?
Move the bill.
It's been moved by Representative Chadwick and seconded by Representative Haroldson. Any amendments on this bill to page 1? Amendments on page 2? Yes?
Chairman Olson, are we thinking about amending what the Colonel just said? To make those changes or no?
Do you have those changes? Representative Provenza?
Mr. Chairman, I do not, but he did point them out to me, I believe.
I just wondered if excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I just wondered if we were going to consider those.
Remind me what we have. What were the changes?
Mr. Chairman, he mentioned there's the personnel file language in line 6 on page 2. There's the word relevant. And I believe he was mentioning to make that consistent with the rest of the statute. I know we see relevant on line 20 on page 2. Maybe you might have him come up and,
Colonel, can you give that to us one more time? So we can at least mull it over.
Yes, thank you. And each, Mr. Chairman, each paragraph.
Is your microphone on?
I'm sorry? Oh, yes, thank you. In each paragraph, it begins with a portion of a personnel file relevant to any factors listed, and then it refers back to all the factors of the background investigation.
91704B, yeah.
And then later, and that's the last sentence, it says the personnel file shall not be disclosed. So it's different than the specific relevant portion of that file. And then it infers the entire personnel file, if that makes sense.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That the
So instead of just that portion of the file relevant to whatever the assertion would be, later it reflects it to the entire personnel file. So beyond the things enumerated in 704B, the factors of the background investigation.
Yeah, I've struggled with this last sentence for a couple of reasons. One, what you're talking about, but also two, the personnel file shall not be disclosed by the commission to any other person. I don't even know, one of my concerns is that's broad enough to include the actual, I mean, that probably includes the person who's the subject of the file. And I don't think that's the intent either. I would assume that you should have access to the file if it's your own file. Do you have specific language that you would recommend, Colonel?
Just instead of the personnel file, which would infer perhaps to some that Post would receive the entire personnel file and not just the relevant sections of that file. So if somehow we could capture that same language in the beginning of the paragraph in that last sentence, personnel file information relevant to the specific complaint shall not be disclosed to anyone, wording to that effect. So it
Or
mirrors.
something like a personnel file made available under this subsection?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Let's see. A personnel file made available under this subsection shall not be disclosed by the commission to any other person except, okay. So the amendment, my amendment would be, I suppose, on line 10, page 2, strike the, replace with A. After personnel file on line 10, insert made available under this subsection. And that same language is gonna apply to the last sentence on page 3 at the top, lines 1 and 2, page 3, lines 16, 17. And that's it.
Second the amendment.
Seconded by Representative Knapp. Barb, does that make sense? Okay,
The rest of the line just follows then?
Yep.
Correct?
correct.
All right, thank you.
Actually, sorry, wordsmithing this on the spot. It should be any portion of a personnel file made available under this subsection. That would be more consistent with the language above. So you're striking the, replace with any portion of A. Yep, made available under this subsection. No, then the sentence would continue. Any portion of a personnel file made available under this subsection, then line 11, shall not be disclosed by the commission to any other person except as otherwise required by law. You could put a comma there. I'm always bad on whether commas, where commas should be or not be.
Second concurs.
Okay. Committee, any discussion on the amendment? Thanks for bringing that back to our attention, Representative Ottman. All right, question on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment has been adopted. Back on the bill, any other amendments to page 2? Amendments to page 3? Amendments to page 4? Okay, you're gonna wait until July 1, 2023 for it to be effective?
Mr. Chairman, unless you would like to make that effective immediately.
Yeah, I would move to just make it effective immediately because we've heard compelling testimony that we're into the years now waiting for these files. It's been moved and seconded to make to amend section 2 to make it effective immediately. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Amendment carries. Okay, any discussion on this bill? All right. Barb, will you do a roll call vote on House Bill 173, records available to post?
Representative Chadwick? Representative Harrelson?
Aye.
Representative Harshman? Oh, he's not here.
Leave it open.
Okay. Vice Chairman Knapp?
Aye.
Excused on Representative Newsom? Representative Ottman?
Aye.
Representative Wiley?
Aye.
Representative Yin, aye by absentee. Chairman Olson?
Aye.
7 ayes, 1 excused, and we're leaving it open, correct?
And we'll leave the vote open for Representative Harshman.
Thank you.
Okay, next bill for our consideration is House Bill 102, the election recount amendments. Representatives Wanitzer, Dave. Welcome back to corporations again. It's your second bill in front of us, isn't it?
Mr. Chairman, it is the second bill in
That's
front of
right.
you, and it'll be the last one because I'm only bringing 2 bills this particular session.
All right.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, this is House Bill 102. It goes down into the elections title, and it's a relatively short bill. What the concern is basically the fact of how many recounts could be made in any particular election. And there's a fear that if everybody comes in and asks for recounts, it's going to, tie up our county clerks. So I will pretty much rapidly, I guess, walk through the bill. On the bottom of page 1, what we're asking when they file their affidavit asking for a recount, they also attach some sort of an affidavit that shows probable cause. And then the county would have a opportunity to either say, yes, there is probable cause and continue on with the recount, or say, no, there is not probable cause, and then not have to be inundated with tons and tons of recount requests. Now, the other caveat on this, on page 2, down in line 5 and 6, if the person that has filed the affidavit still thinks there is some sort of fraudulent behavior that's happening, they can appeal to the court in the competent jurisdiction. So it's pretty much that, plain and simple. And I'd stand for any questions.
So under the existing law, if I want a recount, is there a mechanism to deny me the recount?
For demanding one?
Yeah.
Yes, you file an application and generally $100.
And then as long as I filed the application, $100 is my recount granted, or do I?
No, that's for the application. And then I believe that the recount, I'll have hopefully somebody can testify to that more. If it comes back, then and the difference is over, well, for 1% difference in any election, then there's an automatic recount. So nobody has to worry about really filing an affidavit. But if it comes back, then I think there's a filing fee of $500. And then if it's off by more than 5%, I think down in 22-16-113, it can be even more substantial. But I'll leave the people that know those for a fact testify on that.
Okay. Committee, questions for Representative Zwanitzer? All right. Thank you, Representative Zwanitzer. Let's go to our clerics. We want to make sure we understand the existing process and how this modifies it, because I guess I'm not fully there yet.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and representatives. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the County Clerks Association. We have looked at this bill, and also I need to introduce Malcolm Irvin. He is our president of the Clerks Association and also is a Platte County clerk. So I'm going to go to Malcolm first, and then we'll answer your questions as well during our testimony.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Would you like me to start on your question about the current procedure?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, currently, if a candidate who was not successful in an election, they have the ability to request a recount. That's under 22-16-110. They do have to file an affidavit alleging that fraud or error occurred in the counting. And then that request has to be made within 2 days of county canvass, unless it's a state certified race. In that event, it has to be made within 2 days of the state canvassing board's meeting. So when they make that request, Mr. Chairman, like Representative Zwanitzer said, there is a deposit in 22-16-113. The amount of that deposit depends on the amount of the vote difference, the percentage of vote difference. Between 1% and 5% is $500, and over 5% is $3,000, Mr. Chairman. In these situations, we would only recount the election districts in which that race took place. So, Mr. Chairman, if it was a legislative race that was only contained to a certain portion of the county, only that portion of the county would be recounted. And so, Mr. Chairman, if they file this affidavit, allege there's been an error, to your question about if there's a mechanism currently to deny, the answer is no. But Mr. Chairman, the requests to date have been few and far between. We have a number of recounts that are triggered for other reasons. Those were mandated if there's under a 1% difference between the votes between two candidates, we automatically recount. If the canvassing board believes that there are irregularities, we conduct a recount. And sometimes on our own, if we see something that we just want to make sure, Mr. Chairman, we will conduct a recount as well. So here we are specifically talking about recounts requested by candidates who are unsuccessful. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope that answers some of your questions, but I would be happy to answer any others.
So you're the president of the Clerks Association, which I assume then means you're a clerk in Platte County. Is that where it was?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So explain to me what process would you go through? What would be your thought pattern to reach a conclusion that probable cause is established? And I ask that because, that's a legal question, and I'm familiar with it in the criminal context, that probable cause must exist, and it's usually a decision made by a judge. So now we're going to ask clerks to figure out this burden of proof. Help me understand what that means to you.
And Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. You've identified our primary concern with this bill, which is that we're asked to make a determination on a legal term that has a lot of case law, a lot of history, and we don't have the training to make that legal determination. And so, Mr. Chairman, you've identified our primary concern. If an officer requests a search warrant, the judge determines whether or not sufficient probable cause exists to grant that warrant. And so, Mr. Chairman, in this situation, we see that as a similar requirement that's placed on us is to make that legal determination. So, Mr. Chairman, that is our primary concern with this bill.
Do you have substitute language?
Mr. Chairman, we do not, and I apologize for that. We can ruminate on that a little bit. But Mr. Chairman, really hearing Representative Zwanitzer was really helpful for us to hear what the intent is, and so that will help us think about this further. Unfortunately, at this time, I do not have substitute language.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Malcolm, let me ask this question. You said they're far and few between. So from what I'm gathering because I did a little bit of looking when I saw this, the majority of them are ones that you guys originate, saying, hey, it's within this percentage line, or it's a thing that we're like, man, something just doesn't seem right. The numbers aren't adding up or something like that. So do you believe that this is a problem that we have a solution standing in front of us, or are you sitting there going, I don't really foresee, we're not seeing this like overrun of requests for recounts, so I'm not quite sure why this is coming forward.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Haroldson. I was a little bit flippant in my answer, and so let me clarify. We do a lot of recounts. There are a number of instances where we will initiate a recount. The number of times that recount is initiated because a candidate was unsuccessful and requested is very rare. Mr. Chairman, to Representative Zwanitzer's point, it is very open-ended, so the potential is always there that every unsuccessful candidate who could allege fraud or could allege an error, they do have that potential. And so, Mr. Chairman, it is open-ended. The possibility is always there, of course. To date, that has not been an issue, but it doesn't prohibit it from happening.
Vice Chairman Knapp.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just had one question, probably for the clarification for the public. This request is only brought by a candidate, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. In 22-16-110, it says a candidate may obtain a recount of votes.
Representative Wiley.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Between the cost of the recounts, is it pretty consistent with the monetary impact to the clerks?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wiley, thank you. I would say for the most part, yes. It does depend if it's a countywide recount, and it depends on the size of the county, obviously. A recount in Platte County is fairly quick. It approximately 5,000 votes in a presidential year. In Laramie County, it's much more substantial. And so if it was a countywide race, it would be obviously more expensive. Just depends how much staff do we need, how much staff time. And so, Mr. Chairman, it really depends on the county, but I would say overall, especially when you talk legislative districts are supposed to be similar in size in terms of population. And so, Mr. Chairman, for legislative races, that would be true fairly consistently.
Thank you.
All right, you have additional testimony, I believe? As we just jumped straight into the questions, maybe we got to where you wanted to go.
Mr. Chairman, that was, I think, probably the way we would like to do it every time. And so we appreciate that. And I don't have
where
any
you
more
were headed.
testimony to offer.
But absent this language about probable cause, which is very difficult and clunky, and we may be able to find a solution to it, but absent that, is the Clerks Association supportive of this concept?
Mr. Chairman, I want to walk a fine line here. Our association is always very careful not to support or oppose something unless it causes significant administrative concerns. Right now, our administrative concern would obviously be that we have to make a legal determination. And I would like to clarify something, that as clerks, we don't like to deny requests. We, in the past 2 years, have been inundated with public records requests, and there's none of us that joyfully declined on that request. And so, Mr. Chairman, we don't like to decline requests from the public. There are times we obviously have to. And so, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make that clarification that we don't enjoy declining things, understanding there are times we need to. But, Mr. Chairman, our primary concern was just that making the legal determination of probable cause is problematic.
Yeah, it's fascinating. If there was a denial, then there would be an appeal to a judge, a district court judge, who would then put on a probable cause hearing. And you'd be spending time in hearings then, trying to establish why you reached the conclusion that you reached, which we're not even sure how you would do that. So I think this probable cause language is very problematic. All right. Thank you, clerks. Additional questions for the clerks? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional public testimony? Will there be any additional public testimony? Raise your hand if you're going to testify on this bill. Secretary Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm the Wyoming Secretary of State, Chuck Gray. To my right is our General Counsel, Chief Policy Director Joe Rubino. And to the left is our Chief Deputy, Jesse Naiman. Today I ask that you vote no on.
Who's running the office? All three of you are here.
We're not here all day.
Okay. All right.
We're not here all day.
All right. Just a little nervous. I mean, we're not in the middle of elections, so
Yeah.
it's kind of a down season.
It's good.
Okay.
Today I ask that you vote no on House Bill 102. House Bill 102 sends the wrong message to voters and candidates alike by restricting a candidate's existing statutory ability to request a recount, by heightening the standard to request a recount, and placing in the office where the recount is sought substantial discretion in determining whether that standard has been met. There are a number of concerns with this legislation. First, the heightened requirement of probable cause as opposed to the existing standard of swearing by affidavit that fraud or error has possibly occurred in the counting, returning, or canvassing of votes places upon the candidate a much higher burden than exists today. And this is problematic because protecting the sanctity of our right to vote is one of the most fundamental aspects of our republic, and that ability to request a recount is something that maintains the confidence in our election process. Next, requiring the candidate to provide sufficient facts to establish probable cause to be determined solely by the office in which the recount is sought opens up large gaps in statutory interpretation over what constitutes sufficient facts. This assessment can be almost entirely subjective, and allowing individuals to decide whether or not the affidavit establishes sufficient facts of fraud or error with no objective criteria for doing so, and may make requesting a recount on a good faith attestation that error or fraud occurred virtually impossible, as it leaves complete and unfettered discretion with the office to determine. I also note that it really puts the clerks in a difficult position. And I really think that the current statute works. And, even if you were to adjust this probable cause language, it really, the overall question is, why is this necessary? If the intent of this bill is to reduce or disincentivize recounts, which may or may not turn out to have merit, existing statute already achieves this policy through shifting the expense of a recount on that candidate should no error or fraud be found. The statute requires a candidate requesting a recount to make a deposit of up to $3,000 if you're over that 5% threshold, depending on the calculated difference. And then subsection B has it at $500 if you're between 1% to 5%. And we routinely have primaries, which is where, let's face it, where the action's at in most of these districts with 1,700 voters. I mean, that you hit 20, a difference of 17, you've got $500 to request a recount. And 17, you have to have that, the number of switches that would have a result. That's 9 switches that would attain a different result. And then if there's no substantial difference found, then that cost is on the individual. They're on the hook. I'd also ask, we're not inundated with these requests. I was just talking with the Platte County clerk before we got up here. I mean, there was one that we're aware of where they went through this process and there really wasn't a change, but they paid that expense. And I would note that on the ones that were initiated under the 1%, the race that was in the race in Niobrara, Weston, and portions of Goshen County, I mean, that was a 13-vote race, and that did change. It was 1 vote. It became a 12-vote race. And I was talking with the clerk. Sometimes they do have 1-vote changes. He was explaining that to me, why that happens sometimes. But I just don't understand why we're changing the recount statute here. There really is no problem. I think this is trying to find a problem that's not there. And I think I'm concerned about the message this sends and the confidence in our elections if we start providing this discretion. Thank you.
Committee questions for Secretary Gray? All right. Thank you, Secretary. Additional public testimony? Please come forward. Testimony online, raise your hand if you're in the virtual world and you want to testify on this bill. All right. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Jeff Daugherty. Today I'm here in my personal capacity as a resident of Laramie County to speak to this bill. But first, I want to let you know that I have an extremely high regard for Representative Zwanitzer, and I know he comes to the legislature every day because he wants to leave the state of Wyoming better than he found it. That said, I do have to say that I feel like this is a solution in search of a problem. I need to let you know that I've worked as a volunteer election judge for years and years. Actually, I got paid $25, so I've made dozens of dollars over the years as an election judge. So you can temper my testimony by that. But in that capacity, I can tell you that clerks' offices are prepared for recounts. They're equipped, they've got the staff to do it. And as you heard from previous speakers, it's not very often that the recount process is abused. And additionally, you also heard that it's also paid for by the candidate as well. So I would again tell you it seems that this is a solution in search of a problem. I will also tell you that having done some work for candidates this fall, walking doors, I didn't hear from the community that this was a problem. I ended up on close to 1,000 doorsteps this fall, and not one of them talked about recounts. And so what they did talk about is taxes, federal overreach, the inflation. Not one of them talked about this issue. I was glad to hear the clerks are not asking for this. I was glad to hear the Secretary of State's comments, and I was looking while I was sitting back there as he spoke about the crisis of confidence. And I don't know, it doesn't matter where you come down on whether or not you believe or don't believe in elections. The fact of the matter is, looking at data from 2006 to today, it's usually in the 65% range. And right now, or after 2020, it was sitting around 59, and now it's back up to around 63. So anything we do that gives the detractors an argument is not the right thing to be doing. And in this case, where we're asking a clerk to single-handedly adjudicate this question, I don't think is the right thing to do in terms of building confidence in that electoral process. I do understand that you do have the authority to go to court, but I will tell you, and I know that some of you up there are attorneys, the district court dockets are usually rather distended, and it's difficult to get in. It's very costly to get in, and I don't think that's a reasonable solution for a candidate. Most of the time, as you heard earlier today, these recounts make little or no difference, but I think it's important that we leave this as it stands, allow them to request it. Doesn't sound like it's being abused. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will conclude my comments.
Questions, committee? All right, thank you for your testimony. Any additional public testimony on this bill? And there are no hands raised in the virtual world. I will close public testimony on House Bill 102. Committee, what is your pleasure? Moved by Representative, is it move do pass? Move do pass? Is that what you're doing? Yes, moved by Representative Ottman. Okay. No second. All right, the bill fails to advance for lack of a second. Thank you, Representatives Wanitzer. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 135. Representative Sherwood, welcome to the Corporations Committee. Cities and towns abandoned in nuisance buildings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So today I bring you my Don't Blame the Buildings, Just Give Them Some Love bill. This is meant to address some of our challenging or problem properties in our city limits that currently statute does not address options to incentivize those private property owners to make improvements, nor does it currently address the way that cities or towns engage with those properties. So I will walk you through the bill, and please interrupt as we go if you have questions. So on page 2, section A, lines 3 through 8, this gives a city or a town the ability to designate a property within city limits as abandoned or nuisance if it is vacant, neglected, or deteriorating. On that same page, line 8 through 11 protects private property owners from having to relinquish or sell an abandoned or nuisance building. Section B, starting on line 13, provides criteria for determining if the property is abandoned or unoccupied. Lines 17 through 22 outline criteria for determining if a property is considered a nuisance. So, quote, unlawful use or condition of the property that results in injury to a neighboring property owner or endangers the life, health, or safety of the community defines nuisance. On page 3, section C, this provides the current owner of the building, if declared by the city as abandoned or nuisance, the ability to submit up to 50% of their expenditures for demolishing the building within a 2-year designation for use as a property tax credit. So for
Representative
example,
Sherwood?
yes.
Just going back to page 2, does this bill define vacant or neglected, or is that in an existing statute?
So let's see, let me back up. Page 2, section B.
Oh, in determining whether this property is abandoned.
Yes, so there's outline or definitions for both abandoned and nuisance there on page 2 in section B.
But not vacant. Because A says, let's see, they shall declare it abandoned or a nuisance if the property is vacant or neglected.
So this bill does not
So what does it mean for a property to be vacant?
unoccupied, Mr. Chairman.
So for 51% of the year, 48% of the year, 30% of the year, 75% of the year, I go to Arizona and I leave my house in Laramie vacant. Is that captured within that?
No, Mr. Chairman, you are correct. That definition is not captured within this bill.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 3, section C of the bill provides an incentive to the current owner of the property with the ability to submit up to 50% of their expenditures for demolishing the building within a 2-year period from the designation to use as a property tax credit. So this is example, if they spend $40,000 to remove the building, they could request $20,000 in credit. So the city or town must approve those expenditures and then submit them to the Department of Revenue before they can be used as a credit. And this is addressed later in the bill. So still on page 3, lines 10 through 16 provides an incentive, like I like to say, a carrot for the current owner to make improvements to the building, again, within a 2-year period. In this case, the incentive is greater to rehabilitate the building, as the owner can submit 100% of their improvement expenditures to the city or town for approval. Section D, starting on line 18, creates an incentive for a new owner should the current owner of that property decide to sell. In this case, the new owner who makes improvements to the property, including removal or rehabilitation, has a 5-year period to do so, to complete that work and submit their expenditures to the city or town for approval. The new owner can request 100% of their expenditures towards that property tax credit. Then on page 4, section E, line 7, outlines the process for documenting expenditures related to the improvement to be submitted to the city or town for approval. Only approved expenditures shall be eligible for the property tax credit. Lines 13 through 17 dictate what the governing body shall not approve. Anything that does not directly benefit the designated property or expenditures made after that time limit cannot be approved. And the governing body shall submit any approved expenditures to the Department of Revenue as provided in statute. On page 5, lines 6 through 11, this allows cities or towns to assess an abatement cost via lien if they are the ones to repair, remove, or destroy the nuisance building. Lines 12 through 15 ensure that a lien for abatement costs do not take preference over pre-existing debt that, say, a bank might hold. However, if there is no loan on the property abated, the city or town takes priority on that property. On the top of page 6, this outlines how the property tax credit is applied. Under A and B, the property owner who makes improvements to the building has had their expenditures approved by the local governing body and submitted to the Department of Revenue, can then use that property tax credit against future payments. Refunds and lookbacks are not permitted. Section C, starting on line 16, allows a credit to be used for no more than 10 years after the owner is eligible for the credit. So say, this is an example, say a building in need of repair has a property tax bill of $1,400 a year. Then somebody comes in and puts a new roof on it, redoes the electrical, puts $100,000 into the building, and then the value goes up because it's usable again. So now the property tax bill is $3,000 a year. So if the city or town approves the full $100,000 in expenditures, it can then be credited against the property tax bill for a 10-year period. So then the $30,000 over 10 years becomes, $3,000 over 10 years becomes $30,000. Then the credit expires. So even with the full value of the improvement, that $100,000 considered, the owner may not get the full value of the improvement back in credits against their bill. And then there's no cash payout at the end. Wrapping up here on page 7, section D, this limits the person to claiming or receiving a credit to only one in a 10-year period. So for example, you can't spend that $100,000 to make improvements, go back and file your expenditures for approval and then go back and put another 100,000 and ask for that same credit again. This is a one-time opportunity. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions.
Questions, committee? Representative Haroldson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So does this apply to commercial as well as residential?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haroldson, it is with any property within city limits. So yes.
Follow up? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the second is, when you were talking about a lien being placed by a municipality, could you just run through that again and bring me up to speed? Because I just want to make sure my head's wrapped around that properly.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haroldson, yes, and I believe we have somebody in the room who can testify to this. So when this bill was in front of the body in 2019, this section was not clear. So this is a cleanup. So essentially, if a local government addresses a building as, abandoned, unoccupied, it's been sitting there for 30 some years and they can't find the owner, they go in and make the remediations so that it's not a public safety issue. They can then put a lien for the value of those remediations on the property, meaning that if the owner was to reappear and want to then hold complete title of that building, they would have to pay off that lien amount. I hope I've captured that correctly.
Right. Let's get some public testimony. I know we have Wham. Yeah, there you are. Come on up.
Mr. Chairman, just a heads
Yes.
up, because this has been a collaborative approach to developing this bill, we do have an amendment brought by WHAM and the county commissioners.
Okay, do we,
I have copies of that.
yeah, if you want to hand those over to Barb, then we'll get them distributed. Welcome. Move, stay, it's up to you. Welcome. Who wants to start?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might just, if
Yep.
it's all right. David Fraser, Executive Director, Wyoming Association of Municipalities. You probably recognize the characters next to me here. By now, you've gotten to know Mayor Collins of Cheyenne to my immediate left. Next to him is Mayor Wycombe of Rollins, and down past Representative Sherwood is Pete Laybourne, City Councilman in Cheyenne. We also have more city officials here than you want me to take the time to introduce, but if we could maybe just have them stand so you can recognize the other city officials
let's
that are
do
here,
that.
that would be great.
Welcome. Welcome. Thank you for your service to your communities.
With that, if it pleases the chair, I'd like to allow Mayor Collins to lead off.
Okay, Mayor Collins?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Mayor Patrick Collins from Cheyenne. I really appreciate the sponsor recognizing the challenges that we face in our municipalities across the state. I am really amazed that people who own homes in neighborhoods just walk away from them, and they're empty. Kids get in there, transients get in there, the windows get kicked out, the doors are gone, and it's a devastating blemish to the neighborhood that people live in. We need some tools to help address and encourage people to clean up and remediate, reconstruct these properties. As a mayor, I feel really helpless when neighbors call and plead with us to do something about these properties. The funding model contemplated by this bill would be a big help in our mission to make these neighborhoods back to being complete and replace the attractive nuisances that these homes have become. I think every city and town also has one or two commercial buildings that we just can't seem to get redeveloped. And when I talk to the developers, what I learn is the projects just don't pan out as far as the financial part of it. The revenues that they think they can get from it, when they look at the costs to remediate those buildings, they don't pencil out. And we need something to help bridge those gaps. So in Cheyenne, we've used our urban renewal statutes to remediate the hitching post. And so if you've driven by recently, you notice it's all gone. Next summer, we have a couple of hotels going up, a coffee shop, and there'll be some other things that follow that. And I think of this as being like a mini URA, that we take a single property and we have identified it as being blighted, and we're going to use the property taxes off of that to come back and remediate that building, bring it back into taxes, and bring it back to being an attractive thing in our neighborhoods. And so we'd really appreciate your support and help on this bill. Thank you.
Mayor Collins, can you explain the amendment?
I haven't seen the amendment, but all I know is it restricts the numbers of these that we can do in our cities, and there's a formula from the small to large. And quite frankly, I don't know the exact number, but please.
Would you like me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead, Director.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. And I appreciate not only the sponsor working, bringing this bill, but also she's been really great about working with us. WCCA, who I don't believe Jeremiah is in the room. He's actually has a meeting with his members right now, and so he told us he probably wouldn't be able to be here. But he did also tell us, the both of us, that we were okay to represent that he's on board with this, that WCCA is on board with this amendment as well. What this would do, WCCA was concerned that there be some limits placed on this so that, we didn't earmark the whole downtown of a city or something, which I don't think we really have the capacity to do anyway. So they wanted some limits placed on this. The amendment that's before you would indicate that a city or town of under 15,000 could use this on no more than 3 properties at a time. A city between 15,000 and 50,000 residents could designate no more than 6 properties at a time, and that the governing body of a city or town over 50,000, which, spoiler alert, is only 2 cities, could not designate more than 10 of them at a time. So that's what that does. I think we think that's reasonable. We understand not only because we understand their concerns, but frankly, we need to be able to focus on a limited amount of these to do them right. And so this amendment represents something that WAM and the WCCA have agreed on, and she can speak for herself, but my understanding is the sponsor also find this to be friendly.
I just have a stickler point to the way the amendment's drafted. Isn't by definition in our statutes, don't we define a city as over so much, 50,000 or 40,000 or whatever it is?
Yes, there are first class and second class cities and so forth, and I'm not sure that we followed that formula here, but we're okay if the committee feels better about matching those up.
I was just thinking we should try to make it consistent with whatever we have in. I know it's trying to be broad by saying city or town, but I just thought about that. I don't know what the numbers are off the top of my head either, but.
Yeah, but we'd be okay either way with that.
Okay. Mayor Walcom, did I get it right?
Mr. Chairman, it's Wycombe.
Wycombe, Mayor Wycombe, my apologies.
I've been called worse. Mr. Chairman and council members, our town, if you've ever driven through Rollins, you'll see that we have several properties that are not owned locally. They're owned by people out of town. And I believe that this would be a really good step to incentivize them to sell the property to somebody that will do something with it, or for them to improve it. It's part of the problem is the way they look, but there's a real health and safety issue here. We have several buildings that we have, nothing good happens in these abandoned buildings. Drug things take place. I mean, just all kinds of things take place. And like I said, nothing good happens in these buildings. And we would love to have the ability to make our town look better and improve our tax base. And it's very hard to invite economic development and stuff like that when our town looks like it does. And so I would just really encourage you to take a look at this, drive around the state and look. This is not a Rollins problem or a Cheyenne problem. This is a statewide problem. Almost every town and city in the state of Wyoming has this issue, and our hands are tied. We can't do anything with them, and I would just encourage you to please pass this along.
Questions, committee, Representative Ottman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering if you could help me. In my town, there is some concern about buildings like this, but I didn't see a remedy. Nobody seemed, they said, well, these buildings need to be taken down. Somebody needs to be doing something. And it's like, okay, does each municipality need to have in their policy what is abandoned and nuisance, or is that defined somewhere? And the second thing I would ask is, with this tax credit, does that come out of, what does that come out of since it's a credit? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, to answer Representative Ottman's question, I think most cities, I know ours does, we very well define what's abandoned and what is a nuisance. And as far as the answer to the tax question, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman, thank you so much for that question. It's really the impetus of why this bill is in front of us, is that what is the tool? What is the availability? So this bill aims to create that framework for defining abandoned and nuisance, and to give the cities the tools, the ability to say, we're going to step up and deal with this, or a new owner can step up and deal with it. So in terms of the property tax credit, so it's essentially a rebate on your property tax bill. So when you get that statement in the mail, so the example that I had used of like, your statement is $3,000, essentially it zeroes it out. So there's not money given to that owner, but then the owner's not writing a check to pay that property tax bill. I hope that helps.
Representative Harrelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it might say in the bill, and I didn't catch it, and that's my apology, but is this transferable? Does it stick with the property or does it stick with the person?
Representative Sherwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hilton. Thank you. No, it is not transferable. It stays with the person who owns it and does those improvements.
All right. Councilman Laborn, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent Ward 1 in the city of Cheyenne, which is the older part of town. And I've been dealing with these issues for many years. It has really become more of an issue when we, a few years ago, did a Fight the Blight program, where we really looked at what we could do and how we could do it in a number of ways. And when we did that, we learned a lot about how we determine what is an abandoned and dangerous building, how that whole process works through the ownership, through the title. And I'm certainly no expert on some of the specific taxation issues here, but I am an expert on what people feel and see. And it might be a big commercial building that has been abandoned. It might be a small home. But we've had cases where we actually, because of a family feud, had to take over and tear that building down. And that lot still is in the hands of the family, which admittedly this doesn't directly address. I'm just saying there's a lot of different issues. And in Cheyenne, we've worked diligently to understand through our building department and the codes that we administer how this works. And it is something that, as was pointed out, nothing good ever happens in those abandoned buildings. And it is really difficult for us to stand there with the neighbors and say, gee, we really don't have the direct means of dealing with this. So I speak very much in favor of this. And I think that as we proceed here, we'll learn. And I've talked to the smallest communities and the largest communities. Almost every community in Wyoming has this problem. So I urge you to adopt this amendment, which definitely is important because, no, we're not going to run out and start doing 7 a year. I mean, if we could do 2 or 3, most importantly, that sends a message to other people. Maybe they ought to take a look at their building before we come to them. And we've seen that happen. Oh, there's been a lot of progress in Cheyenne of people fixing up and flipping and transferring property because they knew we were really making a serious attempt at it. So it has a lot of implications in terms of that ripple effect. So we're certainly very supportive of this, and I'm sure you'll find that it does not take away anyone's property rights. What it does is emphasize the property responsibilities that we have as elected officials to everyone in the community. Thank you.
Questions for Councilman Laybourne? All right, thank you, Wim, and thank you, council and councilmen and mayors. Additional public testimony on this bill. Realtors. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lori Erbkite with the Wyoming Realtors, and we applaud this bill. I really liked the concept of it when it was brought in 2019, and I think what happened, it was just late in the session and it just didn't quite get legs, but we really appreciate the carrot over the stick approach. I have concerns on page 5, starting at line 2 and talking about giving the governing bodies of all cities and towns may assess abatement costs. That language concerns me. The statute that it refers to, the special assessment, that's improvement districts. We're talking about roads and sidewalks and curbs and gutters in that section. And I just don't feel like this fits real well with that section. My concern is the process. What process would a municipality go through to decide that somebody's not going to buy this, somebody's not going to do it, so we're going to do it and we're going to then assess the owner. And I understand that that may have to happen, but then in that section under 15.6.421, assessments, certificates of delinquency, issuance, sale, evidence therefrom, and restrictions. And it specifically talks about and may be foreclosed on after 2 years, after that delinquency assessment the assessment is declared delinquent. So I have concerns about that. I'd feel much better about this bill if that section was taken out and we work together to come up with what that process for the abatement should be. And so it's clear. So it's clear for the property owner. In the statute that's referenced, again, that's talking about many owners. It talks about how you divide it up amongst the blocks and what percentage who pays what percentage, that whole thing. And I think we could do a much clearer process for the abatement. The rest of the bill, I absolutely love. I can see this as a real incentive for maybe people to buy some of these abandoned buildings and then do the work, get them fixed up and get that tax credit. I think that's a brilliant idea, but I do have concerns about this assess abatement costs. And I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
So your current solution to the abatement language that you have issue with would be just to remove it? And
Mr.
work on,
Chairman?
and then hopefully find something as if the bill progresses?
Mr. Chairman, that would be my preference. I have not really sat down and figured out how we could word it so that it would be real clear, but I'm certainly willing to work on that in the next days and weeks ahead of us. Absolutely.
Don't remind me, we still have weeks left in this session.
There's only 5 more weeks, 5 more.
Only, yep. Is it 25 days? All right. Committee, additional questions? Thank you, Ms.
Mr. Chairman.
Welcome.
Chairman, I'm Sarah Drenzel. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Economic Development Association. And thank you for the opportunity to offer support on this bill. WEDA represents over 200 economic developers, communities, and entities throughout Wyoming that work to foster economic growth and viability in the state. WEDA is in support of House Bill 135, especially considering our downtowns. We know that downtowns and main streets are the heart of Wyoming's communities. This legislation would give cities and towns the economic development tool that is important to address nuisance buildings that could help downtowns revitalize, thrive, and grow. Investing in buildings pays off for communities. In 2021, the reinvestment value in physical improvements from public and private sources in Main Street programs was $19.34 to every $1. This estimate is based on all designated Main Street communities nationwide, but it does reflect Wyoming because we have 14 communities that participate in Main Street projects. WEDA wants to note the flexibility that this bill offers for local control and flexibility to meet communities' needs and economic development goals. Is an option for cities and towns. It's not mandatory. And incentivizing these improvements within each Wyoming town makes a difference, as you've heard. I just want to thank Representative Sherwood for her leadership and advocacy for economic development in cities and towns. And I'll stand for any questions.
Questions, committee?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Additional public testimony in the room, online? Do we have any hands raised online? Sorry, what was that? There are no hands raised. The bankers? All right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Scott Meyer on behalf of the Wyoming Bankers Association. You know, years ago, the legislature entertained a bill that was similar to this, other than it differed because it said the cities and the communities would repair this stuff, and then the cost of doing the remediation or whatever they had to do with it got a super priority lien that was ahead of the lenders. As you might imagine, the banks had heartburn over this. First in time, first in right was kind of a thing that we've lived by. I got to tell you, I am really impressed, and I commend Representative Sherwood. She came out of the kind of thought outside the box. I think this is a pretty good bill, and she reached out to figure out what the lenders had to say. And I think that's really important because we can get behind this bill. We understood it ahead of time, a few months ago. She asked if there was any questions, any changes. We worked through it. I can't tell you that I would do anything different with this. So we stand in complete support of this bill and would entertain any questions.
Questions for the bankers? All right. Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor, and we don't have a real position on this bill, but I wanted to clarify a couple of things. When we talk about property taxes, you're talking about multiple entities involved in that property tax. So I heard a comment that there would be a credit applied to future tax bills. That's certainly a treasurer's issue, not an assessor's issue, but there are other taxing entities involved in that future tax bill than just the city. So how that credit gets applied back to those taxing entities, I have no idea. But I just wanted to clarify that. And then when it gets to the credit, again, that's more of a treasurer's issue, but I don't know how their systems are designed to do credits, and somebody's going to backfill that, so to speak. So I just wanted to make sure that that got on record. Thank you.
Questions for the assessors? All right, thank you. Mr. Illaway?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Pete Illaway. Served 14 years in the legislature, served on the Business Council, and now currently on WCDA board. Just wanted to, I don't see any other folks from Cheyenne. So, and even though I don't live in Cheyenne anymore, I live outside in the county, I just want to support the mayor and what he's been trying to do. I did run for mayor he's doing a hell of a lot better job than I probably would have done. But anyhow, I just wanted to say congratulations. This is a great piece of legislation, and we need it in Cheyenne. We need it throughout the state, and I'm impressed as far as it's gone. So I just want to say thanks. Move it forward. Let's go.
All right, thank you, Mr. Illaway. Questions? Thank you. Any other public testimony on this bill? I'll close public testimony on House Bill 135. Committee, what is your pleasure? Move it. Moved by Representative Haroldson and seconded by Representative Yin. Amendments, who wants to move the Wham amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the Wham amendment.
Okay, it's been moved by Representative Yin and seconded by Representative Harshman. Or Chadwick, I'm sorry. Representative Chadwick seconded that motion. Discussion on this amendment? Question on the amendment?
Just clarification real quick.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we were just looking and there's 4,000 is the delineating line between town and city, so we don't have any issues with this because we could say.
We could actually remove town then.
We could on the second one and third one, but not on the first one. So we would have to remove town under the second and third and leave town or city on the first.
Did you want to do that, Representative Yin, or do you not care as much as I do?
Mr. Chairman, I think to clean it up, it'd be of a first-class city, but I do worry that we might catch ourselves in
Just
our
leave it alone.
shoelaces, and it's best to just leave it alone.
Okay, we'll leave it alone. Any other discussion on the amendment? Question on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That amendment's been adopted. Are there additional amendments to this bill?
Mr. Chairman, just a question for the bringer of the bill, if I may.
Nope.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, so the question about the credits, I just want to verify with the bringer of the bill, because it falls under the 3913-109D, these tax credits are actually state property tax credits, right?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Sherwood?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yen, yes, thank you.
So there's no other taxpayer, no other taxing entity that is getting, that isn't being paid their taxes. The only credits that are being applied are granted by the state.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yen, correct. So if you can, I meant to bring my tax bill, but if you can visualize it and you see the breakdown of, what goes to city or county or that mill, it's all under where Wyoming can levy taxes. There no federal taxes are included. Thank you.
All right. Any additional amendments to this bill or discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Barb, will you do a roll call vote on House Bill 135, Cities and Towns Abandoned and Nuisance Buildings?
Representative Chadwick? Aye. Representative Haroldson?
Aye.
Representative Harshman? Aye. Vice Chairman Knapp?
Aye.
Representative Newsom will be excused. Representative Ottman?
Aye.
Representative Wiley?
Aye.
Representative Yin? Chairman Olson?
Aye.
8 aye, 1 excused.
All right, thank you, Representative Sherwood. You helped us to be unanimous. Last bill for our consideration is House Bill 189, Homeowners Association Display of Political Campaign Signs. Representative Winter, you're on deck. Welcome, Representative Winter, to the Corporations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm proud to be here with your committee.
Take us through your bill.
Okay, I bring to you House Bill 189, Homeowners Association Display of Political Campaign Signs.
I just want to, first of all, indicate that this bill came to me from one of my constituents, and they felt like political free speech was being trampled upon. And so I'll go through the bill. It's a fairly short bill. This is an act relating to elections limiting regulation by homeowners associations for the display of campaign signs as political free speech on association members' property. There is precedence for this bill. The states of Texas and Arizona, Montana, and Missouri have addressed this situation, and they've all come up with similar bills as what I've brought to you today. This is a pretty simple bill, but we feel like the homeowners associations have overstepped their authority. When a purchaser of a lot in a homeowners association, at least in the one that I'm familiar with, they have to sign a contract, but in that contract, it's very, the portion on displaying signs and so forth is very vague. It just says you can't do it. And so they don't think that's quite right. In 2005, there was the United States Congress had to get involved because the homeowners associations were limiting the display of the American flag. And so flags and signs in this bill are very important. I think we all need to, or will agree that it's an American right to be able to display the American flag. And also during campaign season, it should be a right to display certain signs with, and this bill does recognize that there are certain restrictions that maybe should be put on these this authority. But the bill goes on here and explains what is in fact a homeowners association. There's several descriptions of those. It says, except as otherwise provided by this section, no association shall prohibit the indoor or outdoor display of a campaign sign, including any flag advertising a candidate for a nomination or election to public office or a clearly identified ballot proposition for an election. This bill also says that it shall not prohibit a homeowners association from establishing regulations that are in accordance with the homeowners association bylaws or other governing document for campaign signs. And then it explains some of the restrictions that might be placed on these signs, and they seem to be fairly reasonable. I don't know if anybody could really argue with those. It just seems to make total sense. This bill provides for offenses and what can be done if there is an offense committed. And the bill would not affect anything in the past. It would strictly relate to any future contracts that the homeowners association would provide for another purchaser of property in that association. So that's about all I have. I'd be willing to take any questions or try to answer any you might have.
Okay, committee. Representative Winter, if I understand this bill in summary, it is placing on homeowners associations a stipulation that they cannot outright ban the placement of signs, but it's putting in place a series of time, place, and manner restrictions that are reasonable that a homeowners association can restrict. Maybe the size of it, the duration of time, maybe what it says, how many signs they have, but they can't outright ban political signs.
That's correct. The whole idea is about political free speech.
Okay. Questions for Representative Winter? Representative Winter, homeowners associations, I mean, they could vary, but at least in my understanding, they are a board, and a board that is elected by the homeowners. What is your response to the reality that the people who enter into a homeowners association have the ability to elect their representatives, and if they didn't like a restriction that was placed on their ability to put signs in their yard, that they could simply vote at the ballot box to change their board?
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that has been brought up recently because of this particular bill. And I don't know as this has ever come up before with these folks, but I think it's certainly a valid point. If they do have a beef, they could approach their homeowners association and with a proposal. But I think the bottom line is that we're talking here about the homeowners association overstepping their authority, and that political free speech should not be infringed.
All right, thank you, Representative Winter. Any additional questions, committee? No? All right. Thank you, Representative Winter.
Thank you.
Do we have public testimony in the room? Realtors Association, come on up. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lori Urbakite with the Wyoming Realtors. I think maybe we need to have an understanding clearly of what a homeowners association is. That's the people that live in those homes in that subdivision. They have joined together as an association. They're regulating themselves. And the covenants that regulate that subdivision, and that's where a ban on political campaign signs would be. Those covenants, that is a contract between those homeowners uniting together to define how they want their subdivision to look. So I have some problems with this. I think if a group of homeowners say, I don't want those signs all over my neighborhood, they have a right to say that. And I don't understand why it should be the state's right to tell them otherwise. And there are indeed subdivisions all across Wyoming that have that stance. And they say, no, we don't want political signs all over our subdivision. We don't want your garage door left open for more than time it takes you to move in and out of it. We don't want large trailers parked in front of your house. We want your Christmas lights taken down 10 to 15 days after Christmas. I mean, there are all sorts of those kind of covenants. If you're in an apartment building or a condominium, there may be a no pets covenant. That's between the owners of those properties. They get together, they elect their board, they have a general membership meeting, usually once a year, and at that time they can bring these issues forward, and maybe they are too restrictive, and maybe the owners have changed enough that they want to change those. Those are all in place. That can be done. I just don't understand the need for the state to tell property owners what they can and cannot do as a collective group. My other issue is on page 4, lines 16 through 20, and it talks about a misdemeanor offense punishable by not more than 6 months in a county jail or a fine of not more than $1,000. Who are we putting in jail? The entire group, the board, the president, the treasurer, the woman that in one subdivision I know of here that literally drives around and makes sure that you're not missing out or that you're not violating the covenants. Who's going to jail and who's going to pay that penalty? I guess the association would have to pay the penalty, but I have received a lot of calls from different realtor members that are involved or actively involved in their homeowner association. They go, do we have to have a meeting and change everything? I mean, we prohibit them. And I'm like, well, give me a chance. Let's see how this bill turns out. But I just think it's a private contract between the homeowners. No one's forcing them into this. Some people actually buy into a subdivision like that because they want their subdivision to have uniformity, and they tell you how often you have to mow your grass. And it might be a little much for some of us to think about living in that kind of a covenants and homeowners association, but people buy it because that's what they want. That's how they want their neighborhood to look. So I'd urge you to consider those things. We're not going to fall on our sword one way or the other over this, but it is a private contract between the homeowners. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Ms. Urbicate? Representative Yin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Urbicite, do you know if in our statutes there are any other restrictions on what specifically homeowners associations can do, or would this be the first?
Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of any other, and I used to work for a contractor and we developed subdivisions, and we then wrote subdivision covenants. Some of them very, very restrictive, some of them not. I'm not aware of any, but I could research that more.
It's a great question. All right, thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Urbicate. Additional public testimony? Anyone in the virtual world who wants to testify on this bill? Any hands raised? No? What's that? Nobody has their hand raised? Okay. Welcome, Secretary Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, I'm Wyoming Secretary of State Chuck Gray, and I just want to say that I support this bill, and there's a lot of complaints that come through the office on campaign issues and signage issues, different disputes about signage. So I thought this was something that was important to weigh in on, and I think this is an important bill. It strikes the right balance. It
Secretary
protects.
Gray, do you believe do you find the criminal penalty section a little clunky? Or what?
Yeah, I mean that's more for the committee. I'm okay with it was like it was $1,000, I think.
Well, it's $1,000 fine or 6 months in jail. But I agree with the.
Gets back to the debate on the floor. You got to have a. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
I'm concerned with who would be the target of the criminal prosecution.
Mr. Chairman, it's back to that debate on the floor. I mean, if you don't have a penalty, I guess you have policy, but then there's no oomph there. So, you guys have been discussing that now for 2 days. So, I think overall this bill strikes the right balance. I mean, more and more of the housing in our communities or HOAs, and I think very soon a huge percentage of the newer housing is going to be in this, and it's a growing problem. And I think it strikes the right balance, protecting private property and our right to free expression. I do think the language on flags, I think you need to separate it on campaign signs. That's another important thing in this bill is flags, because the way I read it, I think a very creative attorney would say that it's referring to campaign flags. So one thing is, I would separate it from that clause to make sure that we're talking not just about campaign flags that and maybe a little more enumeration, because I know that listening to the intent of the sponsor, he meant the American flag and Wyoming flag and patriotic flags, things like that. So, which I guess could also subsume a campaign flag, but I think the way it reads is a little unclear. But overall, I just wanted to say that I think this really protects private property rights and also free speech. And this is a growing problem. I think more and more of our housing. I mean, I just moved down here to Cheyenne, and these HOAs, it's a huge percentage of the newer housing. So I think at some point we're going to have to weigh in here on this, and I think this is the time to do it.
Secretary Gray, how do you balance private property rights and the free speech rights with constitutional right to associate? It's what people come together collectively to form homeowners associations. They have an elected board. They set their own rules. I mean, is that not also a constitutional right? And is this the right balance for the state to say, yeah, we really think speech is important, but the right to associate isn't as important?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think it is the right balance. You know, we always just remembered from my legislature days, had it on in the background some of this morning as I was getting some work done. You know, you guys grapple with those policy choices, but in what's the overriding interest? I think that in the political sense here and our patriotic sense, I think that this strikes the right balance. And you know, I would clarify that one clause, but that's where I'm at on it. But fascinating discussions, aren't they?
Never a dull moment in the Wyoming legislature.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for the secretary? Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Additional public testimony? Welcome, Gail.
Gail Simmons from Sheridan County, Civics 307. There's just 2 points. The first one is an embedded assumption, I think, in this, that yard signs actually make a difference. And I would say, having run unsuccessfully twice and worked with a lot of people and done some other, they don't change a single mind.
They make me feel pretty good having
Yeah.
my name all over the place, but
I would also point out that our former sheriff ran for county commissioner, and he would not campaign at all. I think he had like 6 signs that he put up. That was it. So the effectiveness of the signs, and I realize the First Amendment, but first of all, they don't change anybody's mind. But secondly, I listened yesterday on the debate on the floor about individual rights and the rights to not wear a mask versus the right to continue to live because you are immunocompromised. All kinds of rights that were brought up on these individual rights. And I like the fact that you brought up, Mr. Chairman, about freedom of association. Those homeowner rights, homeowner association covenants are in place before you buy into that, the association. You have a right to buy wherever you want. And that association that has those rules, have them in place before you buy in. So the whole idea of this ongoing hammer of you're going to do things the way I want it to because my rights of speech is more important than your rights of where you live or how you want to live or who you associate with is really troubling. So I recommend that you vote this down. I think that there is a bigger conversation that needs to be had in the interim before we continually just chip away at this whole conversation about rights when it comes to voting, rights when it comes to campaigning, rights when it comes to getting a ballot, rights to vote. There's a bigger conversation there. But those are the 2 things. I stand for questions.
committee? All right, thank you. Thank you for crushing our spirits that our signs don't matter. All right.
Save your money.
Additional public testimony? No virtual testimony? All right, I will close public testimony on this House Bill Committee. What is your pleasure? It's been moved by Representative Haroldson and seconded by Representative Ottman. Any amendments to this bill on page 1?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Ottman?
I just have a question, if anybody knows. Do HOAs have criteria that they have to meet to be set up, or can they make their own laws for everything? Do we know?
I am not a legal expert in homeowners associations, but my gut says yes, it's more than just 3 people that say they want to be in an association. There's probably some statutory guidelines.
Okay, I'll look into it.
Any amendments on page 2 of this bill?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think Mr. Chairman, on line 12, I think campaign sign including a US and/or Wyoming flag.
What about a University of Wyoming flag?
Well, I don't know, that's my amendment. US
Cat or a
and/or
Natrona
Wyoming
High
flag.
flag. Okay,
I mean, I think that's the intent, what I heard.
all right. US and Wyoming flag. It's moved and seconded. Any other discussion on the amendment? Does not include the steamboat. I'm just gonna throw that out there, but, all right. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that amendment has been adopted. Additional amendments on page 2? Nope. Page 3?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Page 5, or line 5, that 90 days to 30. And line 8, 30 days to 5.
90 to
30.
30.
And then 5. Okay, let me just back up. Line 5, change the 90 to a 30.
Mhm.
And on line 8, change 30 to a 5.
Okay. Seconded by Representative Chadwick. Any discussion on that amendment? Question on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, that amendment has been adopted. Additional amendments on page 3.
Line 19, it would be 6 to 8. So it'd be a 4x8, so it's a 4x6, so it's a traditional size sign instead of kind of a weird one.
I was thinking this, yeah, the same thing about a road sign. They're 4x8.
Yep. Oh, mine are 4x6.
Any more, yeah, some of, a lot of,
A lot of them. Mine are 4x8.
you got 4x4s?
4x8.
4x8? Yeah, I got 4x8s. You got 2x2?
Because she knows they don't matter.
Right.
I just paint the side of the house.
Well, yeah, no, I completely agree they don't matter. I just like to see my name on an 8-foot sign.
That's right.
All right. Any other discussion on that amendment? It was seconded by Representative Ottman. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
Mr. Chairman, I got,
you got one on 4, Representative Wiley?
so, line 19, delete not more than 6 months in a county jail. And then continuing on to line 20, not more than a fine of $5,000.
So $1,000 is the,
Oh, I guess it'll go into, so.
you'd be making it a felony, basically.
Gotcha.
Is it
1,000.
maybe not your intent?
Yep.
So you just withdraw your amendment?
No, I still want to delete the 6 months in county jail. Line 19.
It's an interesting question, whether it even matters. If it's a misdemeanor offense, I think misdemeanor might be generally understood or defined in law. I don't think you can have a criminal offense without time in jail, yeah. I think if you want to get rid of this provision, get rid of it altogether. Otherwise, I wouldn't monkey with the 6 months. If you want a misdemeanor, you're gonna need it there.
Well, then let's just delete 19 and 20 together. My amendment.
You want to delete the whole thing, 16 through 20?
I apologize. I withdraw my amendment.
Okay. All right. Representative Haroldson?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think just My amendment would be just to delete section 2.
Delete section 2.
Yeah, just the penalty piece.
I think that's what Representative
I
Wiley
think that's
wanted to
where
do.
we're-
Seconded by Representative Wiley?
I'll second.
Okay. Discussion? Representative Ottman?
If there's no penalty, why even bother? Because as I drive across the different counties and my own as well, there's people that leave their signs up for 2 years. And I thought that was illegal, but when I looked into it, it is not, or I couldn't find it. So if we're gonna have something that says this is the way it has to be, then there should be something in there.
But my response, Representative Ottman, would be that you don't need a criminal liability for law to have teeth, because you've created because this bill creates a law that says you cannot do this. If the homeowners association does it, there's a private right of action created for a lawsuit automatically.
So like a civil case or something.
It'd be a civil case, which is really how it would be remedied anyway.
Okay,
Yep.
Which is also expensive. So that's a deterrent in and of itself.
right.
Okay?
So
So I think I agree it's problematic to have this criminal penalty because we don't know who the criminal liability is attaching to. Is it attaching to the president of the board, the entire board? If they're assessed $1,000 fine and you're a homeowner who has a political sign and you pay homeowners fees, now you're paying for part of the fine, even though you were the one who wanted the sign. So I think the criminal penalty is really problematic. And I think the right of private action for a civil lawsuit would be the remedy. And you don't have to put that in the bill for it to be there. The fact that you've created a law is probably enough. It's 202. Any other discussion on this amendment?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be renumbered.
Yep. Okay. Question on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment's been adopted. Any amendments to page 5? All right. Any other discussion on this bill? Barb, will you do a roll call vote on House Bill 189, Homeowners Association display of political campaign signs?
Representative Chadwick?
No.
Representative Haroldson?
Aye.
Representative Harshman? No? Vice Chairman Knapp?
Aye.
Representative Newsom is excused. Representative Ottman? Representative Wiley?
Aye.
Representative Yin?
No.
Chairman Olson?
No.
4 ayes, 4 noes, 1 excused.
What does that mean, Barb? The do pass fail? Okay. All right, we are adjourned.